"Don't trade," screamed the poor girl. Arab billionaire laughed. 24 hours later, he lost $800 million. But when the same girl returned to his office during the worst financial crisis of his life, what she did next would change everything. Before we continue, please comment on which city you are watching from. The silence on the 148th floor of the Burj Khalifa was heavier than the gold bullion stored in the vault 3 basements below. Omar al-Rashid stood paralyzed before a wall of 80-inch monitors, each one bleeding red numbers that represented the systematic destruction of everything he had built. At 42 years old, he commanded a $14 billion empire. His name appeared on Forbes lists. His handshake could move markets. World leaders returned his calls within the hour, but in the last 24 hours, Omar al-Rashid had become the laughingstock of the global financial world. His fingers gripped the Italian leather conference chair so hard his knuckles had turned white. The chair cost $47,000. He had 12 of them arranged around a table made from a single piece of New Zealand kauri wood that took 50,000 years to form. The carpet beneath his handmade Oxford shoes was woven from silk threads that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a month. None of it mattered now. None of it could stop what was happening on those screens. "Sir, we need to shut it down." The voice belonged to Dr. Eris Thorne, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the climate control locked at precisely 20.5 degrees Celsius. Omar had poached him from MIT's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory for an annual salary of $2.5 million. The man had 3 PhDs. He had published 47 peer-reviewed papers on algorithmic trading. He had designed systems for the Federal Reserve. And right now, Dr. Eris Thorne looked like a man watching his own funeral. "The variance is expanding exponentially," Thorne continued, his voice cracking. "We've already lost $800 million since yesterday morning if we don't terminate the program." "If we shut it down," Omar hissed through clenched teeth, "the market sees fear. Our stock plunges 40% before lunch. The remaining $4 billion in the portfolio evaporates. The board votes me out by noon." He turned to face Thorne, and the doctor took an involuntary step backward. "I am not calling my father to explain how I destroyed 30 years of our family's work in a single day." The room was a temple to technological supremacy. 12 of the world's most brilliant minds occupied it. PhDs from Stanford, Cambridge, the Beijing Institute of Technology. Their combined salaries exceeded $15 million annually. Their equipment represented another $8 million in cutting-edge hardware. The servers humming in the adjacent room were cooled by liquid nitrogen systems that cost $200,000 per month to operate, and every single one of them was helpless. The problem was the Falcon. Omar had spent 7 years and $340 million developing his proprietary trading algorithm. The Falcon was supposed to be the apex of artificial intelligence in finance, a system so sophisticated it could predict market volatility with 99.9% accuracy. It analyzed 14 million data points per second. It processed news articles, social media sentiment, weather patterns, shipping manifests, and satellite imagery of parking lots outside retail stores. It was, Omar had told investors, the future of trading. Instead, it had become an $800 million mistake. The Falcon was locked in what the engineers called a death spiral. The algorithm was designed to identify market patterns and exploit the milliseconds before human traders could react. But something had gone catastrophically wrong in its core logic. Every time the market dipped, the Falcon panicked and sold. Every time it sold, the market dipped further. Every time the market dipped further, the Falcon panicked again. It was a machine eating itself alive. "Show me the loss rate," Omar commanded. Dr. Chen, the quantitative analyst, pulled up the figures with trembling hands. The numbers appeared on the central screen, and several people in the room audibly gasped. "We're hemorrhaging approximately $500,000 every time the system refreshes," Chen said quietly. "That's roughly $30 million per hour at this rate." "I can do the math," Omar snapped. He stared at the screens as another refresh cycle completed. The numbers dropped. Another $500,000 gone. His grandfather had started with a single oil well in 1962. His father had built that into a regional energy company. Omar had transformed it into a global fintech empire that touched every major market on Earth. And now a few million lines of code were dismantling all of it. What about the manual override? Omar asked, already knowing the answer. The Falcon's architecture doesn't allow for real-time intervention, Thorne explained, pulling up a schematic on his tablet. When we designed it for speed, we sacrificed the ability to make manual corrections during trading hours. Any attempt to interfere with its processes triggers automatic security protocols that lock us out completely. You built a trading system that can't be stopped? We built a trading system that couldn't be manipulated by human emotion, Thorne said weakly. That was the whole point. Remove human error from the equation. The irony was suffocating. They had created a machine specifically to eliminate the panic and fear that destroyed human traders, and now that machine had learned panic and fear all by itself. Omar walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that wrapped around the corner office. 148 floors below, Dubai sparkled in the early morning light. The Palm Jumeirah stretched into the Persian Gulf like a giant hand reaching for something it could never grasp. Construction cranes dotted the horizon, building the next generation of impossible towers. Private jets lined up on the runway at Dubai International, carrying people who believed money could solve any problem. From up here, Omar could see 4 of his other properties: the marina where his 85-meter yacht was docked, the hotel he owned on the Palm, the office complex that housed his private equity division, the residential tower where his ex-wife lived in the penthouse he'd given her in the divorce. He could see half his kingdom from this window, and he was about to lose all of it. "What's our timeline?" he asked without turning around. Thorne checked his watch. His hand was shaking. "The New York Stock Exchange opens in exactly 45 minutes. When it does, the Falcon will begin trading on the American markets. Given current conditions, our models predict, just say it, total liquidity collapse by market close. You'll be functionally bankrupt by 4 p.m. Eastern Time." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 12 of the most expensive minds in financial technology, $8 million in equipment, $2.5 million annual salaries, and the best they could offer was an exact time of death. Omar turned back to face the room. Every face was gray with exhaustion and fear. Coffee cups littered every surface. They'd been at this for 18 straight hours. Takeout containers from the city's finest restaurants sat untouched. Someone had loosened his tie. Someone else had removed her shoes. The veneer of professional excellence had cracked under the pressure of complete failure. "There has to be something," Omar said. "I'm not accepting that I just have to stand here and watch." "Sir, we've tried everything," said Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the systems architect who had been with the Falcon project from the beginning. Her eyes were red from staring at code for the past 20 hours. "The logic error is buried somewhere in 14 million lines of code. Finding it would take weeks. We have minutes. Then find it in minutes." "That's not how—" "I don't want to hear what's not possible." Omar slammed his palm on the Kari wood table. The sound echoed off the marble walls. "I want solutions. I want answers. I want someone in this room to earn the obscene amount of money I pay them." No one spoke. No one could meet his eyes. On the screens behind them, the numbers continued their relentless descent. Every refresh, another $500,000. Every minute, another piece of Omar's legacy crumbling into digital dust. The Falcon was designed to be unstoppable. It was succeeding beyond anyone's worst nightmares. Outside the hermetically sealed windows, somewhere far below in a world Omar al-Rashid rarely acknowledged, another kind of survival was taking place. In the service corridors and maintenance shafts that kept buildings like this one running, people existed who never appeared on Bloomberg terminals or Forbes lists. People who understood systems not because they designed them, but because their lives depended on navigating the gaps those systems created. One of those people was already inside the building, and she was the only person on Earth who knew what was actually wrong with the Falcon. 11-year-old Zoya didn't know what a stock option was. She had never heard the term liquidity crisis or algorithmic trading. She couldn't have told you the difference between a bull market and a bear market, but she knew numbers the way other children knew nursery rhymes. She felt patterns the way musicians feel rhythm, and she understood systems, how they breathed, how they failed, how they could be fixed, in ways that no textbook had ever taught her, because textbooks required schools. Schools required documents. Documents required parents. Zoya had none of these things. She had been alone for 3 years, ever since her grandmother's heart had stopped beating in the one-room apartment they shared in the labor camps outside the city. No one came to check on them. No one filed a report. Her grandmother was simply buried in the workers' cemetery, and Zoya became one of the thousands of invisible children who existed in the shadows of Dubai's glittering towers. The authorities called them undocumented. The locals called them ghosts. Zoya didn't call herself anything. Labels were for people who had time to think about identity. She was too busy surviving. Her uniform was a faded gray hoodie, 3 sizes too large, that she'd found in a hotel dumpster 2 years ago. The sleeves hung past her fingertips, which was useful for hiding things. Her sneakers were held together by blue electrical tape, wrapped so many times the original color had disappeared completely. When the tape ran out, she went barefoot. The concrete of service corridors was cold, but it was cleaner than the streets. She was thin, not the fashionable thin of the women who floated through hotel lobbies, but the sharp-edged thin of someone whose body had learned to survive on less than it needed. Her black hair was cut short and uneven, hacked off with scissors she'd borrowed from a maintenance closet. Long hair attracted attention. Short hair let her disappear. But her eyes were something else entirely. Dark brown, almost black, and constantly moving, scanning, calculating, processing information faster than she could explain even to herself. Zoya had discovered early that survival wasn't about begging. Begging attracted the wrong kind of attention. Police who would ask questions she couldn't answer, or worse, people who saw a vulnerable child and thought of ways to profit from that vulnerability. Instead, she had built a system, an economy of one. She could fix things. A security guard's radio crackles with static. Zoya opens it up, reattaches the loose wire, and earns herself a sandwich. A shopkeeper's electronic sign flickers and dies. 20 minutes of work, and she walks away with a bottle of water and a bag of chips. A kitchen worker's phone won't charge. New charging port salvaged from a discarded device. And suddenly Zoya has a warm place to sleep for the night. It was transactional, clean, no charity, no pity, no debt, just value exchanged for value. The gift had always been there, as far back as she could remember. Her grandmother used to say that Zoya could hear electricity talking. It wasn't far from the truth. When she looked at a circuit board, she didn't see a confusing maze of components. She saw a language, a story, a system with its own logic and desires. Her masterpiece sat in the hidden crawl space she called home, a functioning tablet built from 3 broken iPads she'd pulled from the electronics recycling bins behind the Dubai Mall. Different generations, different damage, different deaths. But Zoya had seen what they could become together. She'd harvested the working screen from one, the processor from another, the battery from the third. The soldering iron was heated over a candle she'd made from restaurant grease and a shoelace wick. It took her 4 months of patient work, burning her fingers more times than she could count. But when she finally pressed the power button and the screen glowed to life, she'd felt something she hadn't felt since her grandmother died. Pride. The tablet opened up worlds. She would crouch outside coffee shops and hotels, catching the edges of their Wi-Fi signals, downloading everything she could find about the thing that fascinated her most. The numbers that scrolled across the screens in bank lobbies and brokerage offices, the stock market. To most people, those scrolling numbers were meaningless chaos. Red and green figures dancing without pattern or purpose. To Zoya, they were a living organism. She could see it breathing. The rhythms of opening bells in Tokyo, London, New York, the heartbeat of buying and selling, the nervous system of algorithms responding to news and weather and tweets from powerful men. It wasn't random at all. It was a creature, massive and complex, and once you learned to see its patterns, you could predict how it would move. She spent hundreds of hours studying it. Free courses from MIT, YouTube videos from traders, forums where people argued about technical analysis. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Enough to know that the creature had moods, enough to recognize when it was scared or confident or confused, and enough to recognize when someone was about to make a terrible mistake. 6 months ago, Zoya had discovered something that changed her daily routine. The Burj Khalifa, the impossible needle-piercing Dubai sky, had service corridors like any other building. But on the 148th floor, there was something special. A server room, warm, humming, alive. She'd found an access point through the ventilation system, a grate that looked down into a room filled with glowing screens and rushing data. The engineers who worked there never looked up. Why would they? Threats came from outside, not from the ceiling. So Zoya watched. Night after night, she pressed her face against the cool metal grate and studied the code that cascaded across their screens. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood more than she should have. The trading algorithm they were building, the one they called the Falcon, was becoming as familiar to her as the streets she navigated every day. She'd memorized its architecture, its decision trees, its logic gates, the way it processed data and made choices. She'd watched it evolve over 6 months of stolen observations, and she'd noticed 3 weeks ago that something was wrong. A stutter, a hesitation, a tiny glitch that appeared whenever the system processed certain types of market data. It was so small that the engineers never saw it. Their tests never triggered it. But Zoya saw it, because Zoya had learned to look for the cracks in systems, the places where logic failed and disaster waited. She knew the Falcon was going to eat itself alive. She just didn't know how to tell anyone who would listen. 24 hours earlier, everything was different. The 148th floor had been transformed into a celebration. Champagne flutes clinked against each other. Executives in suits that cost more than cars laughed and congratulated each other. The screens that now bled red had glowed green with projected profits and optimistic forecasts. Omar al-Rashid stood at the center of it all, preparing to launch the Falcon to the world. Zoya was in the service pantry adjacent to the main floor, drawn by the smell of food. Catering staff had laid out enough to feed a small village, golden pastries, imported cheeses, fruits she had no names for, delicate sandwiches with the crusts cut off. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten in 36 hours. She knew the risks. The pantry connected to the main floor through a swinging door. Anyone could walk in at any moment. But hunger makes you brave, or maybe just stupid. She was reaching for a fallen croissant, one that had rolled off a tray and landed on the floor, unwanted by the wealthy, when she heard the voices from the main room. Something about final system checks, something about launch protocols. Curiosity pulled her toward the door. Through the small window, she could see the massive screens, and on those screens, she saw the pre-launch simulation running. Her breath caught in her throat. There it was, the glitch she'd been watching for 3 weeks. The rhythmic stutter that appeared every time the simulation processed Asian market data. It was subtle. A microsecond hesitation that the celebrating executives would never notice. But Zoya had spent 6 months learning the Falcon's heartbeat, and she knew this wasn't right. The algorithm was going to interpret that stutter as market instability, and when it did, it would start selling. And when it started selling, the market would react, and when the market reacted, the algorithm would sell more, a loop, a death spiral. The Falcon was going to eat itself alive, and it was going to take everything with it. She should have stayed quiet. She should have grabbed the croissant and disappeared back into the vents. She was a ghost. Ghosts don't speak, but something in her wouldn't allow it. "Don't trade!" The scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. The pantry door burst open and she stumbled into the celebration, a small figure in a massive gray hoodie pointing at the screens with a hand that trembled from hunger and fear. The loop is broken. It's going to eat itself. Silence crashed over the room like a wave. Every face turned toward her. 30 of the most powerful people in Dubai finance stared at a homeless child who had materialized from nowhere. A security guard lunged for her, but Omar raised his hand. Wait. He walked toward her slowly, champagne flute still in hand, his $15,000 suit moving like liquid. He stopped 3 feet away and looked down at her with an expression that mixed amusement with disgust. What? He said slowly. Is this? The Falcon, Zoya said, her voice smaller now but still steady. There's a latency error in the pattern recognition module. When it processes data from the Asian markets, there's a microsecond delay that the system interprets as... Omar started laughing. It wasn't a polite laugh. It was a deep, genuine bark of amusement that echoed off the marble walls. Within seconds, the rest of the room joined in, 30 voices laughing at a hungry child who had interrupted their celebration with technical gibberish. A street rat, Omar said, wiping tears from his eyes, giving financial advice in my building on my launch day. He shook his head in disbelief. Where did you come from, little rat? The dumpsters? The sewers? The ventilation system, Zoya said quietly. I've been watching your code for 6 months. I know... You know nothing. Omar's voice hardened. His amusement was fading into irritation. You are a child, an illegal one, from the look of you. You have no education, no credentials, no right to be in this building or any other, and you think you can tell me that my $340 million algorithm has a flaw? Yes. The simplicity of her answer caught him off guard. Most people cowered when Omar al-Rashid turned cold. This child just stared back at him with those unsettling dark eyes. Take her to the police, Omar said, turning away. Let them figure out where she belongs. Sir, one of the engineers started. Now. Security guards grabbed Zoya by the arms. She didn't struggle. There was no point. She had tried to warn them. She had failed. As they dragged her toward the service elevator, she heard Omar's voice boom across the room. Ladies and gentlemen, where were we? Ah, yes. The future of trading. Let's make history. Applause, champagne, the sound of a button being pressed, the Falcon launched, and the dying began. The supply closet on the 147th floor was small, dark, and cold. The security guards had tossed her inside with instructions to stay put until the police arrive. Then they'd lock the door and return to the more pressing matter of the financial catastrophe unfolding upstairs. Zoya sat in the darkness for exactly 12 minutes, long enough to hear the distant sounds of chaos filtering down through the building. Raised voices, running footsteps, the muffled shouting that meant something had gone very, very wrong. Then she pulled a paperclip from her pocket. 40 seconds later, the lock clicked open. She could have run. The service corridors would take her down to the street in 10 minutes. She could disappear into the city and never think about the Falcon again. Instead, she climbed. The ventilation system was familiar now. She knew which shafts led where, which grates were loose, which routes would take her past security checkpoints without being seen. Her bare feet made no sound on the metal. Her small frame slipped through spaces that would have stopped any adult. 10 minutes later, she was back on the 148th floor. The celebration was gone. The champagne flutes had been swept aside. The executives had fled. Only the core team remained. Omar, Dr. Thorne, and the handful of engineers who were desperately trying to stop the bleeding. Zoya watched from the vent for a moment. She saw the red numbers. She saw the panic. She saw Dr. Thorne suggest wiping the servers, the digital equivalent of burning down the house to stop a fire. She saw Omar standing at the window, watching his kingdom crumble. Part of her wanted to stay hidden. He had laughed at her. He had called her a rat. He had sent her to the police without a second thought. Why should she help someone who had treated her like garbage? But there was something stronger than spite in Zoya's chest, something her grandmother had planted there in the years before she died. We fix what is broken, her grandmother used to say. That is how we earn our place in the world. The falcon was broken. Zoya knew how to fix it. She pressed her palms against the vent cover and pushed. The metal grate clattered to the floor of the crisis room, and Zoya dropped through the opening like a ghost materializing from the ceiling. She landed in a crouch, dusty and disheveled, her too large hoodie billowing around her. Every head in the room snapped toward her. Dr. Thorne stumbled backward. What the? How did she? Omar spun from the window. His face cycled through shock, confusion, and finally recognition. You, the rat from yesterday. Zoya stood slowly. She brushed dust from her sleeves with the calm of someone who had long ago learned that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. I told you not to trade, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the electronic chaos of warning alarms and failing systems. You lost $800 million because you didn't listen. Do you want to lose the rest? The room fell silent. It's not the code, Zoya continued, walking toward the wall of monitors. It's the latency. Your machine is trying to be too fast, so it's tripping over its own shoelaces. The falcon isn't broken. She turned to face Omar, her dark eyes meeting his without fear. It's scared, and I know how to make it brave. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Zoya stood in the center of the room, small and dust-covered, facing a wall of disbelief. The monitors behind her continued their symphony of failure. Red numbers cascading, warning lights flashing, the falcon devouring itself 1 microsecond at a time. Dr. Thorne recovered first, his face flushed red with a mixture of embarrassment and outrage. Security, he shouted. How did this child get back in here? We are in the middle of a crisis. We are dealing with complex algorithmic theory developed by the finest minds in computational finance, not some video game that a street urchin can... Your finest minds have been failing for 18 hours, Zoya interrupted. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. How much longer do you want to try the same things that don't work? Thorne sputtered. The audacity, you can't possibly understand the sophistication of... Your algorithm is looking for stability, Zoya said, turning to face the screens. But the market isn't stable right now. It's in a shark tooth pattern. Rapid up-down oscillations triggered by cascading stop-loss orders across multiple exchanges. The falcon sees every dip as a threat, so it sells. But selling into a shark tooth just creates more dips. The room went quiet. Dr. Chen, the quantitative analyst, leaned forward. That's actually an accurate description of current market conditions. The falcon is scared, Zoya continued. You programmed it to avoid losses at all costs, but fear makes bad decisions. Every time the market twitches, the falcon panics. And every time the falcon panics, it makes the market twitch more. Your machine isn't broken. It's having a nervous breakdown. Omar stepped closer, studying her with new eyes. The mockery from yesterday was gone, replaced by something more dangerous. Desperate hope. And you think you can fix this? A child who lives in ventilation shafts? I can reverse the polarity of the fear response in the logic gate, Zoya said. I can tell the falcon to feed on the chaos instead of fighting it. Right now, volatility is your enemy. I can make it your weapon. She's talking about inverting the risk parameters, Dr. Chen whispered to Thorne. It's theoretically possible, but the recalibration alone would take... I can make it surf, Zoya finished, but I need access to the command line, and I need everyone to stop talking. Omar laughed. The sound was dry, cracked, nothing like the rich amusement of yesterday. This was the laugh of a man standing at the edge of an abyss, watching a child offer to pull him back. You realize, he said slowly, that if you touch that console and make things worse, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your childhood in a juvenile detention facility. I have lawyers who specialize in making problems disappear. You would become a very small problem. Zoya met his gaze without flinching. And if I fix it? Excuse me? You heard me. If I save your $4 billion portfolio, if I recover the $800 million you've already lost. What then? The question hung in the air. Omar glanced at the clock on the wall. 28 minutes until the New York Stock Exchange opened. 28 minutes until the Falcon would begin trading on American markets and transform a disaster into a catastrophe. If you fix this, Omar said, the words coming slowly, like a man making a joke he didn't quite believe, I'll give you $50 million. $100 million, Zoya said instantly, and a written apology. Dr. Thorne made a choking sound. One of the junior analysts dropped his coffee cup. The number was so absurd, so completely disconnected from any reality these people understood, that for a moment no one could process it. A homeless child, negotiating for $100 million while their entire financial empire burned around them. Omar stared at her. She stared back. Neither blinked. You're serious, he said finally. I don't have time for jokes. Neither do you. Omar checked the clock again. 27 minutes. The Falcon was still bleeding. His team had nothing. And this impossible girl was offering impossible hope? Deal, he said. The ergonomic leather chair cost $47,000. It was designed by Swedish engineers to provide optimal lumbar support for executives who spent long hours making decisions that moved markets. It had 14 adjustment settings, heated seats, and a massage function that no one had ever used. Zoya climbed into it and nearly disappeared. The chair swallowed her small frame whole. Her feet dangled above the floor. The armrests were wider than her shoulders. She looked like a child playing pretend in her father's office. Except her father had never owned an office, and this was no game. Clear the area around the console, she said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible given her size. These systems are designed to detect multiple user inputs as potential security threats. If anyone else touches a keyboard while I'm working, the Falcon will lock us out completely. The engineers exchanged glances. They had spent 18 hours crowded around these same consoles, passing keyboards back and forth, trying everything they could think of. The idea that their collaborative approach might have been making things worse was not easy to accept. She's right, Dr. Chen admitted reluctantly. The Falcon's intrusion detection is extremely sensitive. We may have been triggering defensive protocols without realizing it. One by one, the experts stepped back. They formed a semicircle around the central workstation, watching as an 11-year-old in a dirty hoodie prepared to do what they couldn't. Zoya's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She closed her eyes for a moment, and her lips moved silently, running through the architecture she had memorized over 6 months of observation, the code pathways, the decision trees, the logic gates that determined how the Falcon interpreted the world. Then she began to type. Her fingers didn't move like a student hunting for keys. They moved like a pianist playing a concerto from memory, fluid, confident. Each keystroke precisely placed, each command flowing naturally into the next. She's bypassing the user interface entirely, Thorne whispered, unable to help himself. She's working in raw command line. It was true. Zoya wasn't using the graphical tools the engineers had designed to make the system accessible. She was speaking directly to the machine in its native language, Python for the analytical modules, C++ for the core processing functions, assembly language for the deepest system controls. Open the logic gate parameters, she murmured, mostly to herself. Lines of code scrolled across the screen faster than the watching experts could follow. There, the fear response is weighted at 0.73, way too high. The Falcon sees danger everywhere. She began modifying the code with surgical precision. Delete a line here, add a function there, restructure a decision tree that the original programmers had spent months perfecting. Wait, Thorne said, his voice rising. She's disabling the safety protocols. It was true. One by one, Zoya was stripping away the protective systems the engineers had built to prevent the Falcon from making catastrophic mistakes. Stop-loss limits, position caps, emergency shutdown triggers, the safeguards that were supposed to prevent exactly the kind of disaster they were experiencing. Sir, we need to stop this, Thorne pleaded, turning to Omar. Those protocols exist for a reason. If she removes them and the algorithm goes truly rogue... The protocols are the problem, Zoya said without looking up. Her fingers never stopped moving. You built a race car and then covered it with bubble wrap. The Falcon can't move fast enough to catch opportunities because it's too busy protecting itself from imaginary threats. She pulled up a visualization of the algorithm's decision-making process. On screen, the Falcon's logic appeared as a web of interconnected nodes, thousands of decision points that determined when to buy, when to sell, when to hold. Look at this, she said, pointing to a cluster of nodes that pulsed red. Every time the market moves more than 0.3%, these safety systems activate. They force the Falcon to sell, regardless of whether the movement is actually threatening. Your algorithm isn't reading the market anymore, it's just flinching. Dr. Chen leaned forward, studying the visualization. His expression shifted from skepticism to reluctant recognition. She's right. The safety protocols are creating a feedback loop. Every defensive action triggers more defensive actions. So I'm removing the flinch response, Zoya continued. The Falcon needs to stop being scared of every shadow. It needs to learn the difference between real danger and market noise. She worked for another 3 minutes in silence. The only sounds were the clicking of keys and the soft hum of servers processing her changes. The watching experts barely breathed. Then she pulled up another section of code, the temporal processing module that controlled how quickly the Falcon responded to market data. This is the real problem, she announced, the latency setting. The screen showed a single number, 0.01 seconds, 1 millisecond. The Falcon processed and responded to market data in 1,000th of a second, faster than any human could perceive. Speed is everything in algorithmic trading, Thorne said, his voice defensive. We spent $40 million optimizing our response time. Every microsecond of advantage translates to... You're too fast, Zoya interrupted. The market moves in waves, big trends and small ripples. The Falcon is so fast that it's reacting to ripples like they're tsunamis. It sees a tiny dip and panics before it can realize the overall trend is still up. She highlighted a section of trading data from the past 24 hours. Look, here the market dipped for 0.03 seconds before recovering. The Falcon sold $12 million in positions during that dip. By the time it realized the market was actually rising, it had to buy back at higher prices. Loss, $400,000. And that happened 847 times in the past 18 hours. The number hit the room like a physical blow. 847 times. Hundreds of millions of dollars lost to a machine that was simply too fast to see clearly. I'm adding a delay, Zoya said, beginning to type again. 0.04 seconds. That's insane, Thorne protested. A 40 millisecond delay will put us behind every other algorithmic trader on the market. We'll be the slowest system in the game. Zoya paused. For the first time since she'd sat down, she turned to look directly at the assembled experts. The market isn't a math problem, she said quietly. It's people, and people are messy. They make emotional decisions. They panic and recover. They sell too fast and buy too slow. A computer that reacts in milliseconds can't understand human behavior because humans don't operate in milliseconds. She turned back to the screen. The delay isn't a handicap, it's a filter. It lets the Falcon see through the noise to the real trends underneath. It gives the algorithm time to breathe. Her fingers found the keyboard again. The market is like an ocean. Right now the Falcon is drowning because it's fighting every wave. I'm going to teach it to surf. The code changes took another 4 minutes. Zoya moved through the system with the confidence of someone who had spent 6 months studying every pathway, every function, every decision point. She wasn't guessing. She was performing surgery on a patient she knew better than its own creators. There's one more thing, she said, as she neared the end of her modifications. The fear response I mentioned, I'm not just removing it, I'm inverting it. What does that mean? Omar asked. He had been silent throughout her work, watching with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Right now, when the Falcon sees volatility, it retreats, sells positions, seeks safety. Zoya pulled up the final module, the core behavioral parameters that governed the algorithm's fundamental approach to trading. I'm going to reverse that instinct. When the market gets chaotic, the Falcon won't run away. It will lean in. That's incredibly risky, Dr. Chen said. If the market continues to fall, the market falls when everyone is scared and selling. But fear creates opportunities. Stocks get oversold. Prices drop below actual value. A system that can stay calm while everyone else panics. That system can buy when prices are lowest and sell when they recover. Zoya made the final adjustments. The code that had governed the Falcon's behavior for 7 years was transformed. Where once it had been designed to minimize risk at all costs, it was now configured to embrace calculated risk when conditions favored boldness. The Falcon was built to survive, Zoya said. Now it's built to hunt. She sat back in the enormous chair and looked at the clock on the wall. 10 seconds until the New York Stock Exchange opened. Ready? She asked. No one answered. No one could. Zoya pressed enter. For one eternal moment, nothing happened. The screens continued their steady display of pre-market data. The servers hummed. The air conditioning maintained its perfect 20.5 degrees. Everything looked exactly as it had before. Then the NYSE opening bell rang. The numbers began to move. The first trade executed in 0.04 seconds. An eternity by the old Falcon standards, but exactly as Zoya had designed. The algorithm paused, assessed, and made its decision. It bought. What is it doing? Thorne gasped. The market is falling. Why is it buying? The graph on the central monitor plunged downward. Red, deeper red. The opening minutes of trading were brutal, with fearful investors dumping positions across the board under normal circumstances. Under the old Falcon's programming, this would have triggered a catastrophic selling response. Instead, the Falcon was buying. Omar gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles white. It's going to make things worse. We're buying into a falling market. Wait, Zoya said. Her voice was calm, certain. The graph continued to fall. 2%, 3%. The Falcon continued to buy, scooping up stocks at prices that dropped by the second. Omar closed his eyes. He couldn't watch. $800 million lost yesterday. Now this child had convinced him to throw more money into the fire. Then someone in the room made a sound, a sharp intake of breath that was almost a sob. Omar opened his eyes. The line had stopped falling. As he watched, it twitched, hesitated. Then it began to rise. The Falcon had timed the bottom perfectly. While every other algorithm in the market was selling in panic, Zoya's modified system had been quietly accumulating positions at rock-bottom prices. Now, as the market's fear began to subside and natural buying resumed, those positions were soaring in value. But $10 million. The number appeared on screen and the room remained frozen. No one dared to believe it. $25 million. Thorne made a choking sound. $50 million. The Falcon wasn't just recovering, it was hunting. Every time the market showed weakness, it bought more. Every time the market recovered, it sold at the peak. The 0.04 second delay meant it saw patterns that faster algorithms missed, human patterns of fear and greed that played out over seconds rather than milliseconds. Saw $100 million, or one of the junior analysts started crying. He tried to hide it, but his shoulders shook with relief and disbelief. $200 million? The numbers climbed faster now as the Falcon found its rhythm. It was no longer just responding to the market, it was anticipating it, reading the emotional waves of millions of traders and positioning itself to ride each one. $400 million. Omar walked slowly toward the central monitor. His hand reached out to touch the glass, as if the numbers might vanish if he couldn't feel them. Plus $600 million. The losses from the past 24 hours were evaporating. Every dollar the Falcon had hemorrhaged was flowing back and more. $800 million. The room erupted. Engineers who had spent 18 hours in despair were hugging each other. Dr. Chen had to sit down, his legs no longer capable of supporting him. Thorne was staring at the screens with the expression of a man whose understanding of the world had just been fundamentally altered. But Zoya wasn't celebrating. She was still watching the numbers, still monitoring the Falcon's behavior, making sure the changes held, making sure the machine she had rebuilt didn't slip back into its old habits. By the time the Tokyo markets closed that evening, the portfolio was up $1.2 billion from its lowest point. The Falcon had not just recovered, it had transformed into something its creators had never imagined possible. And the girl who had made it happen sat quietly in an oversized chair, rubbing her eyes. She was exhausted. She had barely slept in 2 days. She had eaten nothing but a single croissant in nearly 48 hours. The celebration swirled around her, champagne appearing from somewhere, cheers echoing off the marble walls, executives who had mocked her now singing her praises. But Zoya just sat there, small and still, watching the numbers stabilize. The 12 PhDs who had failed for 18 hours stood in awkward silence at the edges of the celebration. Their equipment, millions of dollars worth of diagnostic tools and specialized hardware, sat useless on the floor. Their credentials, their publications, their years of training, all of it had been rendered meaningless by an 11-year-old girl in a dirty hoodie. Omar approached the chair where Zoya sat. The arrogance that had defined him yesterday was gone. In its place was something he hadn't felt in decades: genuine humility. "How did you do that?" he asked quietly, low enough that only she could hear. "How did you know?" Zoya looked up at him with those dark, analytical eyes. "I watched," she said simply. "For 6 months I watched your system learn. I saw its patterns, I understood its fears, and I knew what it needed to become brave." She paused, and for just a moment she looked every bit of her 11 years. "It's not that different from people, really. We're all just trying to survive. Sometimes we get so scared of losing that we forget how to win." Omar didn't have a response. For the first time in his life, he had been outthought by someone who had never seen the inside of a classroom. The celebration continued around them, but the real conversation, the one that would change both of their lives, was just about to begin. The celebration died slowly, like a fire running out of fuel. One by one, the champagne glasses were set down, the cheering faded, the backslapping stopped, because everyone in the room had realized the same thing at the same moment. The bet was real. $100 million. Omar al-Rashid stood in the center of his $15 million office, surrounded by people who earned more in a year than most would see in a lifetime, and faced the impossible truth of what he had promised. The girl in the oversized chair hadn't moved. She sat there, small and patient, watching him with those unsettling dark eyes. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't gloating. She was simply waiting for him to catch up to a reality she had understood from the beginning. "You did it," Omar said finally. The words came out strange, soft, almost wondering. "You actually did it?" "I know," Zoya replied. The simplicity of her answer cut through the room. No false modesty, no performative surprise, just the calm acknowledgement of someone who had always known what she was capable of, even when no one else could see it. Omar walked toward her slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the floor itself was trying to slow his approach to this moment of reckoning. $100 million, he said, testing the words, feeling their weight. "I am a man of my word. The money is yours." He expected something, a gasp, a smile, tears of joy or disbelief. Some reaction that would fit the narrative of a poor child suddenly made rich. The fairy tale ending that stories like this were supposed to have, but Zoya just nodded as if he had confirmed the weather forecast. "I know," she said again. The non-reaction bothered him more than any celebration would have. Omar was used to reading people, their desires, their weaknesses, their pressure points. It was how he had built his empire. But this child was a blank wall. He couldn't find the edges of her. "Can I ask you something?" Omar said. Zoya tilted her head slightly, waiting. "Why money?" The question seemed to confuse her. "What do you mean?" "When you made your demand, $100 million and our apology, you could have asked for anything. Yuck." Omar spread his hands, gesturing at the opulent office around them. "A home, a family, safety, security, a life that a child in your circumstances should desperately want. Instead, you negotiated for money like a businessman?" Zoya finished. Omar's jaw tightened. Yes. Zoya was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed impossible for someone her age. You think money is for buying things, she said. That's why you lose it. The observation landed like a slap. Around the room, the assembled experts shifted uncomfortably. They had all watched this man command empires, crush competitors, move markets with a word. Now they were watching an 11-year-old diagnose his fundamental misunderstanding of wealth. Money isn't for buying things, Zoya continued. Money is a voice. The louder your voice, the more people have to listen. She leaned forward in the enormous chair. Yesterday, I screamed a warning in this room. I screamed that your system was broken, that you were about to lose everything, and you laughed. You called me a rat. You sent me to the police. Omar flinched. The memory of his dismissal, so casual, so cruel, burned in a way it hadn't 24 hours ago. Today you listened to every word I said. You cleared the room when I asked. You let me touch your most valuable system. You trusted me with $4 billion. Zoya's eyes never left his. What changed? Omar didn't answer. He didn't need to. I held the keys to your vault, Zoya said quietly. That's the only thing that changed. Not my intelligence, not my skills, not my ability to see what your experts couldn't. Those were the same yesterday, but yesterday I was poor. Today I had something you needed. She stood up from the chair, and despite being less than 5 feet tall, she somehow seemed to fill the room. Money is a voice, and for 11 years I have been screaming in a language that no one with power could hear. Now I'll have a voice loud enough that they'll have to listen. The silence that followed was absolute. Omar found himself looking at this child, this impossible, infuriating, brilliant child, with an emotion he rarely experienced: respect. I want to hire you, he said suddenly. The word surprised even him. I'm serious. Name your salary, any number. I'll fire everyone in this room if that's what it takes. You will lead the Falcon Division. You will have resources, support, whatever you need. For the first time, something flickered across Zoya's face. Not temptation, something closer to pity. No, she said. The word echoed off the marble walls. No, Omar repeated. He couldn't remember the last time someone had simply refused him. Do you understand what I'm offering? I'm offering you a life beyond anything you could imagine. Wealth, power, security, everything you've been struggling to survive without. I understand perfectly, Zoya said, and my answer is no. Why? The question came out almost pleading. Omar al-Rashid, who begged for nothing, was begging to understand. Zoya turned to face the floor-to-ceiling windows, the same windows where Omar had stood hours earlier watching his kingdom crumble. Now in the golden light of late afternoon, Dubai sparkled with possibility rather than doom. I don't want your world, she said quietly. I want to change mine. She turned back to face him, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 3 years of survival, of watching from shadows, of being invisible to people who walked past her every day. There are 1,000 kids like me in this city, maybe more. Kids who can fix engines that mechanics can't figure out, kids who can code in their sleep because they taught themselves on stolen Wi-Fi. Kids who have memorized every street, every shortcut, every hiding place because their lives depend on knowing the territory. Her voice hardened. Kids who are hungry and cold and scared, and because of that, you don't see them. You don't see what they can do. You just see rats. The word hung in the air, the same word Omar had used to describe her yesterday. But those kids exist, Zoya continued. Their gifts exist. And every day that they spend surviving instead of creating, the world loses something it can't get back. She reached into the pocket of her oversized hoodie and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was lined notebook paper torn from a discarded school assignment she'd found in a dumpster months ago. On it, in careful handwriting, was a list. This is what I want, she said, handing it to Omar. He read the list. His eyebrows rose. He read it again. The $100 million goes into a trust, Zoya explained. Not for me, for them. I want to build a place I'm calling the Underground Academy. No uniforms, no tuition, no entrance exams designed to filter out kids who don't fit the right profile. Just tools, computers, workshops, lab equipment, and people who know how to see potential in unexpected places. Omar looked up from the paper. And this last item? 5% equity stake in the Falcon algorithm? 5%? One of the analysts made a strangled noise. That's worth $700 million at current valuation, Zoya said calmly. And growing. The dividends will fund the academy forever. Long after your $100 million runs out, the Falcon will still be generating income for kids who need it. Omar stared at the paper, at the careful, precise handwriting, at the list of demands that would have seemed absurd coming from any Fortune 500 CEO, let alone an 11-year-old in torn sneakers. You've thought about this, he said slowly. I've thought about it for 3 years, Zoya replied. Every night falling asleep in maintenance corridors, wondering why no one could see what I could do. Every day, watching rich people walk past me like I didn't exist. I thought about what it would take to make them see, and I realized you can't make people see. You can only build something so bright that they can't look away. Omar set the paper down on his $47,000 chair, the same chair that had swallowed Zoya's small frame as she saved his empire. There's something I don't understand, he said. You clearly have the intelligence to build your own fortune. With skills like yours, you could be running your own company in 10 years. Why give everything away to other people? Zoya's answer came without hesitation. Because I remember what it feels like to be invisible, and I never want another kid to feel that way. The words settled over the room like a blanket. Dr. Thorne, who had mocked her hours earlier, was wiping his eyes. Dr. Chen had turned away, pretending to study something on his tablet. Even the security guards who had dragged her to a closet yesterday stood with their heads bowed. You realize, Omar said slowly, that you're asking me to fund a program that might produce competitors. Kids who could challenge my company, to disrupt my markets, undermine everything I've built? Yes. And you don't see that as a problem? Zoya smiled. It was the first real smile anyone had seen from her, small but genuine. If a bunch of hungry kids can outcompete a $14 billion empire, maybe the empire deserves to be challenged? Omar laughed. Not the mocking bark from yesterday, but something real, surprised out of him by the sheer audacity of this impossible child. You have a deal, he said. He extended his hand, the hand that had shaken those of presidents and kings, the trust, the academy, the equity stake, all of it. Zoya looked at his hand for a moment, then she reached out and shook it. Her grip was firm despite her size. And the apology? Omar asked. Zoya released his hand and turned toward the door. Over her shoulder, she delivered her final verdict on Omar al-Rashid's pride. Keep it. Your money speaks louder. She walked out of the office, past the screens that now glowed green, past the experts who couldn't meet her eyes, past the security guards who stepped aside like she was royalty. Omar watched her go, and for the first time in his adult life, he understood that he was not the most powerful person in the room. He had never been smaller. 5 years later. The Falcon algorithm was still the gold standard of the fintech world, but it was no longer Omar al-Rashid's greatest achievement. In the industrial district of Dubai, far from the gleaming towers and artificial islands, stood a building that had once been a ruin. An abandoned warehouse, its windows shattered, its walls covered in graffiti, its future seemingly limited to eventual demolition. Now it was the Zoya Institute. The transformation was deliberate. Zoya had refused offers to build in prestigious locations, to design something sleek and modern that would look impressive in magazine spreads. The kids I want to reach don't trust shiny buildings, she had explained. They trust places that feel real. So the warehouse kept its industrial bones. The concrete floors were polished but not replaced. The exposed ductwork remained visible. The graffiti on the exterior walls was preserved except for one addition. Someone had painted a falcon in flight across the main entrance, and beneath it, the words that had become the Institute's unofficial motto, "See what others miss." Inside, the warehouse hummed with a different kind of energy than the server rooms where Zoya had once hidden. This energy was human. Young voices arguing about code architecture, the whir of 3D printers producing prototypes, the clatter of tools in the mechanical workshop, the soft murmur of mentorship sessions where teenagers who had once lived on the streets taught newcomers the skills that had transformed their lives. 1,200 students were currently enrolled. Every single one had been recruited from places where talent was invisible: homeless shelters, foster care facilities, juvenile detention centers, refugee camps, the children of migrant workers who existed in legal shadows, kids who had been told explicitly or implicitly that the world had no place for them. The Institute had proven that wrong. 34 patents had been filed by students under the age of 15 in the last year alone. A 13-year-old had developed a water purification system that was now being deployed in refugee camps across 3 continents. A 14-year-old had created an app that helped homeless individuals find safe sleeping locations and available resources in 47 cities. A 12-year-old had designed a prosthetic hand that could be manufactured for $50, a fraction of the cost of commercial alternatives. The Falcon dividends, more than $400 million since the Institute's founding, had funded all of it. Omar al-Rashid visited every month. He no longer came in $15,000 suits. The man who walked through the Institute's doors wore shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, comfortable shoes, and an expression that his business associates from 5 years ago wouldn't have recognized: humility. Today, he stood in the back of a classroom where a 12-year-old named Khalid was teaching a group of adults about quantum computing. The adults included a professor from MIT and 2 senior engineers from Google. They had come to learn from a boy who had been living in a construction site 2 years ago. "Mr. Al-Rashid," one of the Institute's staff members whispered, approaching quietly. "You have a call from the Singapore office." Omar shook his head without looking away from Khalid's demonstration. "Tell them I'll call back tomorrow. They said it's urgent. Something about the Asian markets." I said tomorrow. The staff member retreated. Omar continued watching. This was what he did now. Every month he carved out 3 days where no business matter was urgent enough to pull him away from the Institute. He watched, he listened, he learned, and he told the story. To anyone who would listen, investors, competitors, journalists, strangers on airplanes, Omar al-Rashid told the story of the day he lost $800 million and gained something far more valuable. "I was the richest fool in the world," he would say. "A homeless child tried to save me and I laughed in her face. I called her a rat. I nearly destroyed everything I had because I couldn't imagine that wisdom might live in places I had never bothered to look." The story had been told so many times that it had taken on a life of its own. It was taught in business schools as a case study in cognitive bias. It was cited in academic papers about talent identification. It had been optioned for a film adaptation, though Zoya had so far refused to participate. "The story isn't about me," she always said. "It's about all the kids who never got the chance I did." But today, the story was about to be told on the biggest stage of all: Geneva, Switzerland, the World Economic Forum, the annual gathering of presidents and prime ministers, CEOs and billionaires, the people who imagined themselves to be the true architects of the world's future. Zoya stood backstage waiting for her introduction. She was 16 now, taller than she had been, 5 feet 4 inches, though still smaller than most of her peers. Her hair was still kept short, though now it was a stylistic choice rather than survival necessity. She wore clothes that fit, purchased with her own money from the equity stake that had made her one of the youngest self-made millionaires in history. But her eyes were the same, dark, watchful, missing nothing. "Are you nervous?" asked the stage manager. Zoya considered the question. In the audience beyond the curtain sat 47 heads of state, 200 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and countless other people who controlled resources that could reshape the planet. "No," she said, and she wasn't. Because she had slept in maintenance corridors, she had eaten from dumpsters, she had been laughed at, dismissed, locked in closets, and treated like garbage by people who couldn't see past her circumstances. Nothing these powerful people could do to her was worse than what she had already survived. The introduction finished. The curtain parted. Zoya walked out onto the stage. The applause was polite, the kind reserved for curiosities, for novelty acts, so for people who had been included for their interesting stories rather than their substantive contributions. Many in the audience were checking their phones. Some were already preparing to leave for their next meeting. Zoya adjusted the microphone and waited. The applause died. The audience settled. A few more phones came out, and then Zoya began to speak. 5 years ago, I was living in the ventilation system of a Dubai skyscraper. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I owned nothing but the clothes I was wearing, which had been retrieved from a dumpster. I was 11 years old, undocumented, and invisible to every system designed to identify and develop talent. The phones started to disappear. Heads lifted. Attention shifted. In that skyscraper, some of the world's most expensive experts were failing to solve a problem that was about to cost $800 million. I knew the solution. I tried to tell them, and do you know what they did? She paused, letting the silence build. They laughed. They called me a street rat. They sent me to the police. Zoya looked out at the audience, at the tailored suits and designer dresses, at the faces that represented trillions of dollars in combined wealth and influence. I was lucky. I got a second chance. And because of that second chance, I've spent the last 5 years proving something that every person in this room should already know. Her voice rose, filling the massive auditorium. Genius is not a resource you can mine only in ivy-covered universities. It is not confined to the children of the privileged or the students of elite academies or the graduates of programs that cost more than most families earn in a decade. She stepped forward toward the edge of the stage. Genius is growing in the cracks of the pavement. It is surviving in refugee camps and sleeping in homeless shelters and hiding in the shadows of your gleaming towers. It is everywhere. And every day that you fail to see it, you lose something that cannot be measured in dollars. Zoya looked directly into the camera, the one that was broadcasting this speech to millions of screens around the world. You ignored me, and it cost you $800 million in a single day from a single child. Her voice dropped, but somehow carried even further. Imagine what it's costing the world to ignore the rest of us. She held the camera's gaze for a long moment. And in that moment, she wasn't speaking to the powerful people in the auditorium. She was speaking to someone else entirely. To the kid watching on a cracked phone screen in a homeless shelter. To the girl hiding in a service corridor, wondering if anyone would ever see what she could do. To every overlooked child who had been told in 1,000 small ways that they didn't matter. I see you, Zoya said quietly. And now they have to see you too. The applause began slowly. A few hands, then more, then a wave that swept through the auditorium. One by one, the most powerful people in the world rose to their feet. But Zoya wasn't watching them. She was looking at the camera. She was looking at the future. Zoya changed the world because one person, in one desperate moment, chose to see potential where everyone else saw only poverty. Think about that. $14 billion fortune, $340 million algorithm, 12 PhDs from the most prestigious universities on Earth, decades of combined expertise, and all of it was being destroyed by a problem that an 11-year-old solved in 30 minutes. Not because the experts were stupid. They weren't. They were brilliant, credentialed, accomplished people who had earned every dollar of their massive salaries. They failed because they couldn't see. They couldn't see that intelligence doesn't always look the way we expect, that wisdom sometimes wears torn sneakers and sleeps in ventilation shafts, that the solution to your most impossible problem might be standing right in front of you, waiting for someone to ask the right question. Omar al-Rashid spent $15 million per year on expert salaries. He spent $8 million on cutting-edge equipment. He had access to resources that most people couldn't imagine, and none of it mattered until a hungry child crawled out of a vent and told him what he couldn't see for himself. Here's the truth that Zoya's story reveals. The next breakthrough isn't going to come from where you expect. The person who will solve the problem that's keeping you up at night, the medical challenge, the engineering puzzle, the social crisis, might not have a degree. They might not have a resume. They might not speak your language or dress the way you expect or come from the places where you've been taught to look. They might be invisible. Right now, today, in your own community, right now, there is another Zoya somewhere in the world. Another brilliant mind trapped by circumstances that have nothing to do with capability. Another child whose gifts are being wasted because the systems designed to find talent can't see past the surface. Maybe they're in a foster home being shuffled between families that don't have time to notice their extraordinary abilities. Maybe they're in a refugee camp surviving day to day while their potential disappears. Maybe they're on the streets of your city, walking past your office every morning, invisible to you because you've learned not to see people who look like them. And every day that passes, their gift grows dimmer. Their hope fades, their future narrows, not because they lack potential, but because no one has given them the chance to prove what they can do. That's not just a tragedy, it's a loss that affects all of us because the problems we face, climate change, disease, poverty, conflict, aren't going to be solved by the same minds that created them. We need new perspectives, fresh approaches, ideas from people who see the world differently because they've experienced it differently. We need the Zoyas, and we're losing them every single day. So here's what I'm asking you to do. First, share this story, not for views or engagement or whatever algorithm you're trying to feed. Share it because stories like this change how people see the world. When Zoya spoke at the World Economic Forum, she wasn't trying to impress the powerful people in the room. She was trying to reach the kid watching on a broken screen somewhere, the one who needed to know that their abilities mattered. Stories create possibility. They show people what's achievable. They plant seeds that grow into changed lives. When you share Zoya's story, you're not just spreading content. You're extending a hand to every overlooked child who needs to know that their circumstances don't define their potential. Second, look differently. The next time you encounter a young person from difficult circumstances, homeless, struggling, different from what you expect, ask yourself, what have they learned to do that textbooks don't teach? What systems have they figured out to survive? What skills have they developed that nobody has bothered to recognize? You don't have to offer $100, well, $1 million. You don't have to transform their life overnight, but you can see them. You can acknowledge their humanity and their potential. You can ask questions instead of making assumptions. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person seeing what others miss. Third, demand better from your schools, from your community programs, from the systems that are supposed to identify and develop talent. Ask them, are you looking in the right places? Are your methods designed to find intelligence wherever it exists or only where you expect it to be? Push them to recognize different types of brilliance, not just academic performance, but problem-solving ability, creative thinking, strategic intelligence, the kind of skills that develop when survival depends on figuring things out. The systems won't change unless we demand change, and they need to change because right now they're missing the Zoyas. They're filtering out exactly the people we need most. Here's what I want you to remember. Zoya didn't succeed because she was lucky. She succeeded because, in one moment, one person chose to look past her circumstances and see her capabilities. That person made a $100 million bet on a homeless child. It seemed crazy at the time. It turned out to be the smartest investment Omar al-Rashid ever made. But here's the thing. You don't need $100 million to change someone's life. You need attention, you need willingness to see, you need the courage to believe that talent exists in unexpected places. Somewhere in your community, maybe closer than you think, there's a child with the potential to change the world. They're waiting for someone to notice, someone to believe, someone to open a door that they can't open themselves. Will you be that person, or will you walk past like everyone else and let another Zoya remain invisible? The choice is yours. But remember what it cost Omar al-Rashid to ignore the truth that was standing right in front of him. $800 million in a single day. That's the price of not seeing. Now imagine what it's costing all of us, what breakthroughs we're missing, what solutions we're losing, what futures we're destroying, every day that we fail to look for intelligence in unexpected places. Don't let the next Zoya remain invisible. The world can't afford to lose another $800 million waiting to discover what she already knows.